Welcome everyone. Thanks a lot for staying with us. You're watching Plain Speak with me, Shivani Gupta. From Australia to the United States to the United Kingdom, Khalistani goons are going on a rampage, denouncing Punjab police's crackdown on Amritpal Singh, for example, in India. In London, something unprecedented happened. Pro-Khalistani supporters barged into the Indian High Commission and tried to pull down the tricolour. Windows were smashed, slogans were raised against Punjab and central government. And there were no efforts, frankly, from the UK cops to stop these Khalistani vandals. Something similar played out in the United States. Pro-Khalistani supporters vandalizing the Indian consulate in San Francisco. Doors were broken, slogans were chanted. If this wasn't enough, Khalistan backers made graffiti on the wall of the building with the words, "Free Amritpal." As the crackdown on Amritpal Singh takes place in India, a Khalistani referendum of sorts has taken place in Brisbane. The propaganda appeared to have flopped as only a few hundred community members turned up to vote anyway. While the numbers associated with any such activities are low, and anyways they are happening not in India, so frankly not India's headache, the question does arise over rising such propaganda activities in countries with large Indian and Sikh communities, and how India can impress upon these governments to act. In fact, do these governments realize they are fundamentally giving a free run to elements who can spoil their own atmosphere in the future? And is it now time in India to completely isolate and crush this entire Khalistan campaign funded by the Pak deep state? We'll take those questions to our guests in just a bit. Take a look at what actually happened, starting with London. One of the pro-Khalistani protesters tried to scale the balcony and lower the tricolour, which was flying proudly at the Indian High Commission in London. Khalistani supporters can be seen attempting to replace the tricolour with a Khalistani flag as well. Clearly, an attempt to undermine India's sovereignty. I'll come to, of course, what has been the reaction of the UK government in just a bit. But following this attack, India provided what is the most appropriate response to supporters of Khalistan by hoisting an even bigger flag, a much larger Indian tricolour at the High Commission that had previously been there, and that is an appropriate response at this stage, of course. A couple of people who do deserve to be specifically mentioned and praised are these individuals who were at that balcony who saved the pride of the Indian tricolour. You can see a gentleman in these visuals who actually took away the tricolour from these Khalistani goons and kept it secure, put it inside. And then, of course, there is another gentleman also who makes sure that the Khalistani flag cannot be held at that balcony of the Indian tricolour. So, these are, of course, extremely proud Indians who made sure that the attempt by these Khalistani goons can be thwarted in the face of clear hooliganism and gundaism. It appears like there was a coordinated attack, and I say this because after the vandalism in London, what has come to light is that the Indian consulate in San Francisco was also attacked. Videos of supporters breaking doors, trying to barge in have gone viral on social media. You can see that frankly these are a handful of protesters who come with these Khalistani flags, but look at the mentality and the manner in which they're trying to barge into Indian properties overseas, and really thuggery at its best. Amid Khalistan sympathizer, Amritpal crackdown and hunt in India, a Khalistani referendum, as I mentioned, was held in Australia on March 19, which was a complete fail, quite like the visuals that we see coming in from various attacks on Indian consulates. You can see only a few hundred people who have gathered. Remember, lately though, Khalistan-backed attacks or Khalistani attacks on Hindu temples have been rising in Australia, and that's a matter of concern. Australian agencies have only just been shown to show some action, and they've been accused of being soft on such elements who've been openly prejudiced in their actions against another minority, the Hindu minority in Australia. It's not, frankly, just a matter of political ideology. Today, a handful of Khalistan supporters also gathered at the Australian Parliament in Canberra to protest against Punjab government's crackdown on Amritpal Singh. These are visuals that have been reported by the Australia Today. Questions are being raised, of course, of why the Australian government continues to give these elements a free run. We'll come to those questions in just a bit. India has indeed raised the matter quite seriously with the UK government of what happened in London. Definitely not pleased at how the attack at the Indian embassy was allowed to happen in the first place. This is what India has said. There was complete absence of British security. that allowed such elements to enter, get to the building, and that's where the British agency should have been there. India finds unacceptable the indifference of the UK government. India has highlighted that there's indifference to the security of the Indian diplomatic premises and personnel. Clearly, lives were at risk. Nobody knows what these goons could have done. India has said that we expect the UK government to take immediate steps to identify, arrest and prosecute these individuals and put in place stringent measures to prevent the recurrence of such incidents. What we've also learned is that there was prior knowledge of such plans and the whole thing was totally avoidable. Sources have told CNN News18 the UK government was not prompt as far as their action is concerned, especially because there was advance warning given to the UK government of such a possible attack. UK cops were alerted a day before. Despite the alert, no police team or additional police teams were sent to the Indian consulate. 13 to 14 Sikh boys have gathered and they protested, and these protesters are allegedly students from a local college. A review into the UK government scheme set up to prevent terrorism had flagged exactly this, inflaming of anti-India sentiment around the subject of Kashmir and Khalistan. And despite that review that the government in UK has accepted, one wonders why they're acting in such a lackadaisical manner. The review carried out by Commissioner for Public Appointments, William Shawcross, warned the UK government against a false narrative being disseminated by pro-Khalistan groups in the UK. I'm just highlighting a few portions on what it said on Khalistan angle. Pro-Khalistan extremism coming from UK's tiny number of Sikh communities. Report mentioned how UK's Khalistani groups are spreading false narratives. It also stated that false information is being spread about UK government and the Indian government to spread, of course, displeasure, discontent. Such groups' narratives glorify violence carried out by pro-Khalistan movement in India. And we see, of course, shades of that playing out in India as well. We will focus on the Amritpal angle in just a bit. Now, another big question is, from UK to Australia to Canada, USA, why are we seeing such a spurt in such gay propaganda activities in different countries lately? Frankly, this is because of Pakistan's frustrations in Kashmir. This is part of Pak ISI bid to avenge India, especially after the abrogation of Article 370. Tight security and dominance of the Indian forces in Jammu and Kashmir means Pakistan has to look to Punjab to create unrest. ISI is using Khalistani groups to fan terror in the border state. Pakistan reportedly provides social media push to K forces online, apart from the fact that we've known a lot of weapons drops taking place from across the border. Foreign governments, and this is what we will discuss a little bit further today, treat India's demands for action against such elements with skepticism, but ultimately they're playing with fire. So the big debate that's coming up today, from Australia to US, the Americas, UK, when will this gay provocation end? What do these governments need to do, and what does the Indian government need to do?
Some were carrying placards demanding the freeing of Amritpal Singh. At one point, one of the protesters climbed onto the balcony here. He pulled down the Indian flag and some people below were pulling it down. He then tried to hoist a Khalistan flag right there. At that point, he was stopped by a security man from the Indian High Commission.
इस तिरंगे की आन बान को बचाने के लिए कितने ही सिख सैनिकों ने अपनी शहादतें दी। आज हम ये सब महसूस करते हैं कि ये भावना सिखों की नहीं है। चंद लोग जो कर रहे हैं उसकी सिखों की भावना मत समझा जाए। सिख ना कभी ऐसी सोच रखते हैं, ना कभी रखेंगे।
Lieutenant General K.J. Singh, former General Officer Commanding-in-Chief of Western Command, is joining us. Manju Seth, former diplomat. Adit Kothari is founder, Indic Society, based in London, joining us on the show. We're waiting for the arrival of a few of our other guests as well. Lieutenant General, I want to come to you first. What do you make of the entire fiasco that's played out? Is the UK government not solely responsible for the kind of mess that we witnessed at the Indian embassy earlier today?
Shivani, Jai Hind, and thank you for having me on your show. Now see, this is a very serious lapse on part of intelligence and law enforcement agencies of UK as well as USA and even Australia. Now these countries know that there is significant population of Indian diaspora over there and they have some very questionable kind of interest, and there is certain amount of vote bank politics and the situation, the communal amity, traditional one, has been disturbed recently in the recent past, at least in Australia. So knowing all these things and their intelligence agencies not acting proactively, and even law enforcement agencies, I have been lucky to have seen these places. I can't imagine how somebody can just get in like this and police can allow that to happen. So it is deplorable, it is disgusting, and it needs to be condemned, and the least which these governments can do is put out an unqualified apology and not pretend on this shield of liberalism and all this, which is not acceptable.
No, I mean,
and
it's okay if you have liberalism as far as your communities are concerned. You allow protests of all kinds. Frankly, I mean, I don't want to get into it, but we've seen what's happened in countries like England, in France, in other countries, in Canada, and how they deal with protests that are against their own government. So it's another matter why they act so freely about such communities vandalizing properties. But this is not about liberalism. You may support, not support their cause, and frankly, I'm not interested in that. But you cannot allow desecration of somebody's property, and an embassy is extremely important property of a foreign country. We've seen similarly, sir, in Australia, temples being attacked, vandalized, another minority community being terrorized. It's not enough to say that this is all liberalism, right? I mean, this is about somebody else's right as well. And why are they so indifferent?
Shivani,
I want to understand from you.
Shivani, I also can't understand, and I totally agree with you. And there can be no justification for this kind of activity. Embassy or chancery or consulate is the seat of authority. We work on quid pro quo basis. The kind of security we provide to their embassies is something which is exemplary. So they have to replicate it for us. And to just say that it has happened, they can't get away with that. I would hope that these governments see the light of the day and see what kind of support has he got in India. There's no support. There has been a so-called wishy-washy referendum where nobody is turned out. So a person who's a self-appointed Waris, the Punjab, even the original constituents of that organization, the relatives of Deep Sidhu, are questioning. And the way Punjab is standing by and not rising or erupting into any kind of a disturbance is in itself a vote of no confidence. So a person who doesn't enjoy any standing here, you are allowing his handful of supporters, and misguided ones who want some kind of attention, post some pictures on Facebook, social media, show themselves as big heroes. Those kind of people are doing this, and it is time they should also find out who's funding these people.
Yeah, absolutely. And is it fundamentally about money actually? Because we see a lot of lackadaisical attitude in governments like the UK government or in Australia, in Canada. We know that there's a large Khalistani movement. But Manju said, as a diplomat, I want to understand from you, why is it that these countries are a little bit meek in their response to these Khalistani elements? Whether they're their citizens or not, they cannot allow these elements to vandalize somebody else's property or, make very xenophobic attacks on the minority Hindu community, which all of them are guilty of at one point or another.
Absolutely, I agree with you. These kind of incidents are absolutely unacceptable, and these Indian missions are all Indian property. And it's like an attack literally on Indian sovereignty when they allow such things to happen. And it is absolutely the norm that every diplomatic embassy is given extra security, and especially on a Sunday, and especially when it had been communicated in of London that there was apprehension that there could be an attack, so an extra police contingent should have been there, which obviously was not there, and it is something which it is really unacceptable that such a thing could happen. It was really very horrifying to see the way the flag was brought down, and there was no one to stop these people. How could they reach the balcony? Just climb up the premises and reach there. And in San Francisco and Australia, even in Australia, there were reports recently that the honorary consulate in Brisbane was attacked and vandalized, and the local police did nothing. I think a reason seems to be that the Indian diaspora or the Sikh diaspora, some elements amongst them are extremely, I mean, they're all, the Indian diaspora is all very well off, but there are some in the Sikh community, I understand, who are very close to the political class there and are able to influence their thinking and their approach to the whole question of action against these elements. Of course, there are not very many who are militant and who are doing all this, but because and these countries say, we allow freedom of protest, we allow this, we allow that, but freedom of protest is something different. And attacking Indian temples, attacking Indians, and in the case of Australia, there were visuals some time back showing that these people had swords in their hand, they had sticks in their hand, and whoever was a Hindu was being out near the temple was being hit, threatened that we will kill you if you, and because I think there was some event where they had the tricolour in their hands, and they were pulling it out, and so these kind of things, this is attacking Indians and attacking them and endangering lives and endangering property and on our missions, an attack on our sovereignty. And I think we have communicated it very clearly to all these governments, and they must understand, irrespective of where their funding comes from, in such cases where security is threatened, they have to take action. And we must make sure that there is reciprocity in such cases in case there is no further movement and further action to stop all this.
Yeah, Manju Seth and KJ Singh, I'll come back to you. I want to go across to Adit Kothari as well. How do you see what's played out in London? Adit, you're from London. We've been discussing this rise of Khalistani propaganda and activity. Propaganda is one thing, but real on-ground activity has seen a little bit of a spurt. And of course, we know why this is happening and where this gets funded from. But why is there such a meek attitude towards it from the UK government, despite being great friends of India, even in Australia, the Americas? Why is it that they're not taking this threat very seriously? Because vandalism of any kind, even for their own society's atmosphere, they mustn't promote.
Shivani, just to answer that, the latter part of your question as to why the Western countries are not taking and nipping these people, but is primarily because it's electoral politics playing out in the West. Like, Dr. Jaishankar also mentioned a couple of weeks ago that the politics of India is essentially emanating from the West. This is one of those kind of issues which has been played out for a very, very long time. If you look back 2019, there was a massive Pakistani protest against the abrogation of Article 370, where they vandalized the Indian High Commission in a similar fashion, where windows were broken. Stones were thrown, eggs were pelted, and essentially we had to go out and clean the Indian High Commission at that point. So it's the failure of the security apparatus, no doubt. Article 31 of the Geneva Convention clearly outlines that there should be enough security provided at any given point of time by the states to avoid any sort of intrusion and damage. And this is where the British security has completely fallen short. And this is not the first time we've seen. 1984, Ravindra Matre happened. General Bra was attacked in London not so long ago. We see the Indian High Commission being attacked again and again, not only in Britain but also in the Americas, in Canada, in Australia. So clearly, there needs to be more assertiveness from our council generals and our high commissions to ensure that more security is provided, and any any such activities. Protest is a democratic right, but vandalism is not. So I think that's where the agencies need to draw that clear line. You mentioned a while ago about the Prevent report, which came out a month ago, and they essentially called out the Khalistani elements within Britain being a security risk, not only just to India but also to Britain. It essentially shows that when you give birth to Frankenstein, when you're essentially making Frankensteins in your own backyard, they will eventually come and attack you as well. Exactly. So this is what is essentially playing out in Britain. From a diaspora perspective, we are quite threatened at this point because there is a clear fissure which is very, very visible between the Hindu-Muslim divide, between the Hindu-Khalistani divide. I wouldn't call them Sikhs because there are more number of Sikhs who do not come out. They're more silent majority who do not come out and opine on these issues. And we only want to bolster their voice and galvanize them to come out and call out this rabid agenda.
Yeah, but Adit, something is terribly going wrong in UK particularly. Before I go across to the other guests on the global, global phenomena, you looked at what happened in Leicester recently, right? There was like such mass level propaganda against Hindus in Leicester, in Birmingham, despite the fact that they were at the receiving end of absolute criminal activities. Caught on camera, right? We had an a Hindu temple desecrated in full police's view. The police was just standing there as mute spectators. I can only imagine the horror if a mosque was attacked by any Hindu person in Britain. And even then, the government faced questions over why they are not reacting in the manner that they should, why the cops don't react in the manner that they should. Maybe they don't understand what's happening. But this is still your land. You need to act according to the law of the land. Forget about the politics of the people involved. And then later, of course, it was revealed what was the propaganda against the Hindu community in Leicester. We've mentioned the Prevent report that clearly highlights exactly what we've been highlighting. But is the government, are the elements in the government just so close to these, Islamist Khalistani groups that they don't act? Is that what's happening?
Absolutely. I mean, if you look at this particular protest, right, it was essentially led by a gentleman called Avtar Singh Khanda, whose father is Kulwant Singh Khurana, who's a known terrorist of the Khalistani Liberation Force. He and this person, Avtar Singh Khanda, is on asylum visa in the UK. He's not even a British citizen. So the question should be raised with the British agencies as to how do these kind of elements get, how do they bypass the visa regime? I mean, I'm an immigrant from India who's migrated to the UK, and I've had to go through a number of checks and balances before I could actually obtain my British passport. It wasn't a straightforward, cakewalk for me. So how do these people essentially get there? So there is definitely some sort of assistance which is being provided by the state, undoubtedly, which needs to be called out, which needs to be questioned. The K2 movement with regards to Kashmir and Khalistan is not a new movement which we see in the UK. It's been playing out in Britain right from the 1970s. Pakistani ISI has clear tentacles, very deeply entrenched within the British polity and the British academia, which is extremely visible.
Yeah. Tushar Gupta, senior editor, Swarajya magazine, is also joining us. He looks at the entire Khalistani element angle and Punjab politics very closely. But Tushar, I begin by asking you about the whole entire global phenomena. There is a problem on India's hand, will you concede, when it comes to these attacks mounted by pro-Khalistani groups rising in other countries? And how do you think the Indian government should meet this challenge? Because ultimately there is propaganda and people fall for that propaganda too. And it is the responsibility of the Indian state to fight that propaganda. Are we failing to do that?
Absolutely, Shivani, you're spot on. And you know how the propaganda works. We saw it in Singhu just 2.5 years ago. We saw it at the Red Fort on January 26. And this propaganda stems out of 3 countries mainly: Canada, United Kingdom, and Australia. Now, the way these 3 countries handle their domestic protests, they're in no condition to lecture us as to how we should go about separatists in India. And they're in no position to play safe when it comes to the separatists on their own soil. What has happened in the United Kingdom yesterday is absolutely unacceptable. It should be unacceptable to the foreign ministry in India and they have summoned a diplomat, but that's not enough.
That's not
At
enough.
the end, you have to realize, Shivani, this is not the first time this has happened. Since 2019, there were protests in Brampton in Canada where there are regular routine calls for a Khalistan happening every now and then. There are rallies. In California, for instance, during the farmer protests, there used to be rallies and people who spoke in favor of the farm laws, they were being hounded by the Khalistani elements there, and yet the US government took no step. In Australia, we're seeing what happened at the Brisbane consulate. In Canada, we've been seeing this. In United Kingdom, now we've been seeing this. Look, Shivani, the water has, crossed every acceptable level now. The Indian ministries need to take a hard call, even if it comes at the cost of trade, even if it is a little stern diplomatic reaction, it is warranted. Canadians cannot allow separatists on their land. Same goes for United Kingdom. Same goes for Australia. Because at the end, what happens? These people are throwing in their money by way of remittances in Punjab. They further the propaganda. They further the agenda against the Indian state. And one of the creation was Amritpal Singh Sindhu, who's now on the run.
Yeah,
But
I'll come to Amritpal in just
step.
a bit. We are discussing the situation in Punjab vis-a-vis Amritpal in just a bit. But Manju said, I want to understand from you. India has good relationships with all of these countries. India has economic heft today in the diplomatic circles. India's diplomacy is working very strongly. That's what the government is telling us. Then why is it that the Indian government is not being able to extract action out of these governments?
What happens, Shivani, in most cases is that we have to, we convey our protest, we call their ambassadors here, the high commissioners here, and we are given assurances. Even when the Australian Prime Minister was here,
Yes.
Mr. Allen, he has given his full assurance. So we would like to give them a chance, or we would like to give them, when there's assurance at the highest level, we would like to see action, and we think and we hope and we expect that this action will take place, and we do give little time. But I think now, as mentioned by the previous panelist, I think we really need to up the ante and start putting a little more diplomatic and economic pressure to make sure that our security concerns are taken note of, and and this kind of vandalism and this kind of desecration of the flag and of our premises, diplomatic premises in different countries, is not permitted at all.
Yeah, I think economic pressure is going to be the answer as well. That's what works, frankly, the most when it comes, and it can work behind the scenes, and it works, frankly, the best when it comes to squeezing these movements out of funds. And Lieutenant General KJ Singh, I want to come back to you. I'll ask you the same question I asked Tushar. What is the challenge in front of the Indian establishment, both at home but also overseas, since we're discussing in the context of these attacks growing across the world? What is the challenge for the Indian establishment to ensure that this propaganda doesn't win? How to do that?
Shivani, see, today all activities have an info warfare or narrative shaping built in. It has to happen. Now, we are doing creditably well. We are not doing badly. It's what happens is, it's a small group, it's a small voice which is getting amplified. They are craving for attention and oxygen of publicity. As regards general people are concerned, they are quite convinced about the Indian story, and it's not going to impact on that. So probably we need to differentiate our approach a little more, nuance it, fine tune it, reach out to the opinion makers in these countries, and it's a constant battle. Whereas in our own country, suspension of internet for a while, and then getting through to Twitter to block these handles, these all measures are in place.
But sir,
And
in
I
your
would now
experience,
believe
is the Khalistani agenda, is it growing or is it stagnant, or what is the thing?
Shivani.
What do you think?
No, Shivani, it is just barely surviving. It is, even when Amritpal was doing it, people in Punjab were not with him. You sing it yourself. They, Punjabis, don't want this. They want their state not to go back to that phase.
Okay.
I was a major when we fought these militants there. So I would, and these Punjabis are quite that way, they have a native wisdom. So they don't want to fall into this trap.
No, but they may not be driving this agenda. Is the threat becoming bigger, or is the threat in our control?
threat is now under our control, because Amritpal, if he was allowed to grow, it could have gone out of hand. So now it is under control. We need to follow through, take it to logical conclusion. And there are other measures. It's a multi-agency approach. The way state government and central government are now working in concert, the fact that some prisoners have been shifted to Dibrugarh, NSA is going to get applied. So all in all these measures are getting in place. And let's have an air of optimism.
Okay.
I'm sure things will improve in days to come.
Okay. Yes, Tushar, very quickly.
Shivani, I was in Punjab a few days back, and I can tell you one thing. Amritpal Singh, by running like a fugitive, has done the people of Punjab a great, great favor, because now everyone sees his charade exposed. Even though with him there was no Khalistani threat, even the people who are pitching for this entire idea about Khalistan know that it's a pipe dream. The Indian state is too strong to entertain any such nonsense. But now, running like a fugitive after making such lofty claims, he's done the people of Punjab a great, great favor. The people can see right through him. And the threat, even though there was a little one that was emerging, is now addressed properly.
I'm discussing Amritpal a little bit more in detail in just a bit. Tushar, you're welcome to stay along with us if you feel so. But I want to give a final minute to Adit as well. Adit, what can the rest of the Indian community do, the diaspora do in countries like England, to make sure that this is not the nonsense that grabs attention?
I think from an Indian diaspora perspective, I think we need to engage with the Sikh community much more. We need to increase that engagement. We need to ensure that any false narratives that are being peddled within the community can be decimated. There's a lot of false information, a lot of false narratives that are being peddled, which has also been articulated in the report that William Shawcroft essentially presented a couple of weeks ago in the Parliament. More importantly, what I feel, one of the questions that you asked, Shivani, was about what can the Indian diplomacy do? I think the cost needs to be raised higher with regards to these rabid elements. Identify who these people are. Cancel their PIOs, cancel their OCI. Ensure that they do not get visas into India. That should be a fundamental step that the high commissions in all of these countries that should be taken. We haven't heard or we haven't seen any sort of proactive measures coming from the Indian missions in all of these countries.
Okay.
So I would really implore those consular generals to think about this particular issue.
Yeah, I mean, generally India doesn't like to be seen as very harsh on any community, even if there are certain rabid elements in those sections on the communities. Maybe the time has come to switch gears a little bit, because we cannot allow something like this to happen at a regular pace. I do thank our guests for joining us. Tushar, if you want, you can continue with us, because we are shifting our attention to the other big